This episode is brought to you by Pause, Breathe, Reflect, the app that can help bring more mindfulness to your everyday moments. Imagine what would be possible if more people could live more mindfully. Hey there, my fellow like-hearted humans. It's Michael, and this is the Kintsugi Podcast. And this week, we have another one of our open awareness segments as I share stories of connection from my bike ride across America in 2022, along with my wife, who drove our RV that we named Maisie, and two of our dogs, Hopi and Jester with a J. So we started in Astoria, Oregon, and we're finishing up in Washington, D.C. That's where we met. We started our family there. And specifically, we finish up at the Lincoln Memorial. Because the purpose of this trip, one, was to celebrate life, as I celebrated my last bad day, at that point in time, the 21st anniversary of it. It was also to show people following this wonderful country that we all share. To let them know of the goodness within America and the good people within America. So I thought finishing at the Lincoln Memorial would be fitting as a way to think about what will it take to help us come back together. And this notion was true back in 2022, and as I record this in 2024, it's still a need. There's still a need to heal what needs to be healed in this country so we can come together. This week, I'm going to share stories from two states. Indiana, so you can cue up a little John Cougar Mellencamp, some little pink houses for you and me, and the Pretenders as we head back to Ohio. And that's where we're going to start. So we're going to do this a little backwards today. And we'll start in Zanesville, Ohio, home of Tom's Ice Cream Bowl. Now, if you've been following along, you know that at the end of every day, one mission was to find a dairy bar so I could get a milkshake. And the days where we were stuck in the middle of nowhere and there was no ice cream, we had some fixins in our RV. But I just gotta say, Tom's Ice Cream Bowl, it was the real deal. I felt like I was back in the 70s watching Happy Days. Now, a little about Zanesville, and I will say, for the record, I didn't meet everyone in town, and I didn't cover the whole town. But it felt like every fast food restaurant possible was there. And for me, I left Zanesville feeling that it really illustrated the problem we have in America with fast food and this quest for convenience over quality and our unhealthy diets and all that jazz. And yes, I'm about to talk about ice cream. When you walk in to Tom's, as I just mentioned, it feels like you go back to the future, if you will, back to the 1950s. There were tables and booths for people who wanted to eat, and there was a counter, and at the counter, it was good old-fashioned ice cream making. They made the milkshake in one of those metal containers with an old-fashioned mixer. It was so good. But the story I want to share with you, because I appreciate humor with good timing. I appreciate clever humor. And as we were leaving with our proper milkshake and a little dinner, we walked past the counter where they sell nuts. I'm not going to do my Forrest Gump, but there were a lot of nuts there. Walnuts, pecans, cashews, sunflower seeds, you name it. And the restaurant was generally staffed by young kids. I would say high school, college age. So we stopped, looked at the nuts, and next to us was a customer also shopping for nuts. And she asked one of the kids behind the counter, "Are these nuts good? "Are these cashews any good?" And he said with great confidence, "Best in the state, ma'am." And she was like, "Really? Best in the state?" And then, with perfect timing, he turned to his coworker, we'll call him Pete, and he said, "Hey, Pete, are these the best nuts in the state?" And Pete responds, with perfect timing, "Best nuts in the state? Heck, they're the best nuts in the country." And then the woman said, "I'll take 2 pounds." I just love that moment. It has stayed with me for over 2 years. It's these little moments in between all of our bigger moments that make life so special. I don't know. Maybe you had to be there, but I hope you appreciated the story. So that was a little warm, fuzzy story from Ohio. But there was a cold prickly, as one of my former bosses would say, also from Ohio. One of the RV campsites we went to, the residents there, and there were a lot of people living there full time, they had a ton of Confederate flags and other flags from one of the presidential candidates. And I've talked about this in a previous open awareness, so I'm not going to get into it again today. But the whole experience made me feel unsafe. In the RV camp, you could feel the pain. You could feel the hatred or the othering, and we do that so often. One quote I keep coming back to, especially over the last several years, is, "Anger is when pain makes a public appearance." There's a lot of hurt in this country. And as I mentioned up front, part of this trip was to show our country to others. The goodness, the good people, but also the hurt that we feel, as a way to acknowledge that we have some healing to do before we can come together in our Kintsugi spirit. So this was unsettling to me, to see so many Confederate flags in Ohio. I might anticipate this, say, if we were in Georgia or Alabama or Mississippi in the Deep South, but I didn't think I would experience this in Ohio. Of course, intellectually, I knew that racism and sexism and all the other isms exist everywhere, not only in this country, but globally. But being there at that RV camp, it felt different. It definitely opened up my awareness even more fully. It made me even more committed to do what I can and hopefully inspire others to do what they can to continue to help us heal, so we don't have so much pain and therefore so much anger. My wish for the world is that we can get to a point where we stop othering each other. And maybe we need more forgiveness to make that happen. And with that, I want to take you to Indiana. We came into Indiana, into Terre Haute. And in Terre Haute, the Candles Museum, the Holocaust Museum, is there. It was founded by Eva Kor. She was a Holocaust survivor. And in 2012, we took a family trip to Europe. We flew into Paris. We went to Normandy and paid our respects at Omaha Beach. And while I was there, I just marveled at how much courage the troops must have had to come into those cliffs that day, knowing that many of them were not going to survive. Right before we left for Europe, my wife discovered that Eva Kor was going to be at Auschwitz, the concentration camp that her family was sent to from Hungary. And she was going to do a small group tour and teaching of her experiences there. So we decided, after going to visit some friends in Basel, Switzerland, to go into Krakow and take the train to Auschwitz. There, we joined up with about 30 other people, and Eva was there in a golf cart. It was blazing hot, and she had all the energy in the world. And she talked about her experience there. When Eva and her family arrived at Auschwitz on the train, her and her twin sister were separated from the rest of the family. They, along with 6 million other Jews, as we know, didn't survive. Eva and her twin sister, though, did survive. But during their time at the camp, they went through horrific medical experiments because the Nazis were curious about twins. So they tortured them and other twins, other kids. Luckily, both her and her sister got out of the camp as the war ended, and Eva came to Terre Haute, Indiana to establish her life and then subsequently opened the Candles Holocaust Museum. Several years before we met Eva on the tour in 2012, she became somewhat of a controversial figure because she publicly forgave the Nazis for what they did to her and her family. In her statement of forgiveness, she said she was forgiving the Nazis not because they deserved forgiveness, but because she did. She knew that as she carried around the animus toward the Nazis, all that pain, she couldn't live the life that she wanted to live. She couldn't, in my words, put the type of ripple she wanted to put into the world. She was taking out one massive rock from her backpack. And again, this was controversial. Not everyone agreed with her. But she did it for herself as a way to heal. As she shared her act of forgiveness with the tour, I began to wonder, what would it take for me to totally forgive the driver or to offer forgiveness to myself? For 11 years, I was carrying many rocks in my backpack because I was bitter. That driver made some really poor decisions, although I did realize that he didn't wake up that day looking to get me. He just made some poor decisions that forever changed my life and changed the lives of those around me. And as we traveled back to Krakow, I sat with that question. What does it mean to forgive? How could I offer myself forgiveness and possibly more forgiveness to the driver so I could take a rock out of my backpack? And by the time we got back to Paris and Charles de Gaulle Airport to come back home, I had already placed those rocks in a field in Europe, letting go and completely forgiving the driver, maybe not because he deserved forgiveness, but because I did. And current day, this may be an opportunity for all of us to look within and see where we might be willing to offer forgiveness. Perhaps not forget, but offer forgiveness to someone else or offer it to ourselves so we can let go of some of the pain we've been holding on to. All right, let's switch gears and we'll end on a high note, a warm fuzzy, if you will. So let's go to Rushville, Indiana, and the Wild Moose Café and Antique Shop. It was a really quaint, charming place. I came in for a nice latte and a blueberry muffin, and as I waited for my drink and my food, there was a table of about 12 people, all clutching their coffee. There were other tables too with other patrons to the cafe. But as I turned to leave, one of the elders at the table said, "Hey, biker dude, come over here. We got some questions for you." And they were typical questions. What are you doing? Where are you from? Where are you going? Why are you doing this? Why Rushville? They were people celebrating their 250th anniversary. As I left, everyone at that main table and all the other little tables all told me, God bless you. It was their way of letting me know that they're offering me some care. They're hoping that God would help guide me on a safe journey towards Washington, D.C. Now, through the years since my accident, I've had this weird relationship with God. I don't find myself to be all that religious from an institutional perspective, I like to think about whoever fills up your mug, so Mother Earth, the universe, God. And I go back and forth between all three of them. So I might not be as spiritual or as religious as those people in the cafe, but it was their way to offer some form of connection. We saw each other. And again, if we got into politics, we might see the world differently. But that's only one thing to really talk about. There's so many other things that are common to every one of us. And as I mentioned up front, one of the reasons why I wanted to do this trip is I wanted to experience America. I also wanted to share it with other people because those people are good people. We have good people in this country. There are good people across our planet. And if we can pause just long enough, slow down just a bit, clutch our coffee and have conversation, connect with our breath, and have really meaningful conversation. And the conversation we had at that cafe wasn't deep, but it was a, hey, I see you. When that woman said, hey, biker dude, come over here, she was like, hey, I see you. I want to hear your perspective. I want to know a little bit more about your story. I think we can do that. We can all do that. Maybe a little bit more intentionally, a little bit more frequently, as a way to come together. The easy thing to do is to other each other, but that will only further divide us. That will only add to our pain, and with more pain, there'll be more anger, and there'll be more othering, because we'll look for reasons why we're not living the life that we want to live. To live the life that any of us wants to live, we first start within. We start to have a better conversation with ourselves so we can have better conversations with others, so we can see that we have so much more in common than what divides us. So the othering becomes we, it becomes us, and we start to heal. We start to unite. But coming together takes work. It's work that has no end. And I'm signing up for this work, and I hope you'll join me. I know your time is your most precious resource, so I so appreciate you taking some of your time to spend it here on the Kintsugi Podcast and listen to these stories of connection. I hope they inspire and motivate you. I hope they find a way to help you heal if you need healing, because healed people heal other people. So thanks for listening. And if you haven't already left a kind review and rating, I hope you'll do so. I also hope you'll share this episode, this story of connection, with people you know, so we can put a better ripple into the world. You might want to send it to a few people from Indiana or Ohio that you know. And until next week's story of connection, together, let's celebrate our golden symbols of strength and resilience. This episode is brought to you by Pause, Breathe, Reflect, the app that can help bring more mindfulness to your everyday moments. Imagine what would be possible if more people could live more mindfully.